This is an introduction to the for loop in C++. And to start with, I am going to compare it to the while loop. So I do assume that you studied what the while loop is first. So here is a while loop. So we're first going to declare a variable x, make it equal to 1. And then we set up a while loop where our condition says keep repeating the code within the braces as long as x is less than or equal to 10. Okay, well, it starts out as 1, so you're going to see out the value of x, or 1, and then you're going to increment x. And then after you do that, you go back and test the condition, and if it's still true, which it's 2 now, so it's still true, then you do the code again. And not until x gets to 11, then you go and test this condition, will it exit the loop? Okay, so this just outputs 1 through 10. Okay, now let's do the same thing using a for loop. So using a for loop, the way we would write this would be for, and then our within our parentheses, instead of just putting our comparison right here, we're actually going to put 3 things. The first thing we're going to put is a variable declaration, just like we did here. So we're going to say int x is equal to 1. Okay, then we're going to put our condition right here, which means keep executing the for loop as long as x is less than or equal to 10, semicolon. Okay, so, and then the last thing we're going to put is, okay, what do we want to do after each run of the for loop? And we're going to increment x. So we'll put x plus plus. And so now I'm going to do my braces, and so it's going to repeat all the code within the braces. So let's just do the cout x right here. Okay, and to see that it does the exact same thing, I'm going to delete this code right there, and then compile and run. And so you can see it outputs 1 to 10. Okay, so the way it works is, with a for loop, the first item you put in the parentheses is your variable declaration. It does that one time at the beginning of the for loop. So you declare a variable x, make it equal to 1. And then the next thing it does is test the condition. So you test the condition before you do each loop. And if that condition is false to begin with, then you won't do anything. Okay, but in this case, while x is less than or equal to 10, which is true, so then you do your code. Now, after you run your code in the braces, then you go up here and do this right here, whether it's an increment or a decrement or whatever. And then once you do that, you test the condition again. And if the condition is still true, in this case x is 2, then you run the code again. So once again, not until x gets to 11 will it kick out of this loop. Okay, so now one little difference between the while loop, if I were to try to see out x after the for loop, let's see what happens here. I'm going to pull this up. This has the build messages right here. So compile it, and we get an error message. It says x was not declared, because with a for loop, when you declare a variable within the parentheses of the for loop, that variable only exists while the for loop is active. Once the for loop ends with the closing brace, then this variable goes away. So just FYI. Okay, now some terminology. A lot of times, each time through the loop, we would call an iteration. Okay, so each time through a loop is an iteration. Okay, and so then therefore, a lot of times they will call this the iterator variable, the variable that you use to step through the loop. Okay, so and because it's sometimes called the iterator variable, you'll see a lot of programmers use the letter I for the variable, I for iterator, just like that. So that's very common. You don't have to do that. It's just very common. You see that in a lot of code. Okay, so now let's look at this Well, this should run again. I just changed the variable name. Now let's run it. Let's change the heading to make it print 10 down to 1. Instead of 1 to 10, we'll print 10 to 1. Okay, so in this case, let's start I at 10, and we're going to execute as long as I is greater than or equal to 1, or you could just do greater than 0. And here we would do I minus minus, just like that. And so build and run, and there it goes. Now we have 10 down to 1. Now let's do the powers of 2. Let's start I at 2, while I is less than equal to 256. And now we can do I equals I times 2, which of course, so we're just going to double I each time. Okay, and so let's watch it run. And so now we have the powers of 2 up to 256. Okay, and of course, I equals I times 2. There's a shortcut, a way of writing that. You could do I times equals 2. There's a shortcut. Same thing. Okay, so that's the iterator variable. Now, let's ask, when do you use a for loop versus a while loop? Well, you could use either one for any loop situation. However, the rule of thumb is if you need an iterator variable or a counter variable, then the for loop is probably the best choice. Whereas if you don't need an iterator variable, if you're not counting up, counting down, or something like that, then probably just a while loop. Maybe you have a while loop that's going to keep executing until the while loop prints a main menu, and then it keeps executing the main menu until the user enters the option 5 or whatever to exit. So you're not counting up or counting down or anything. Okay, so that's the rule of thumb. Okay, so now let's look at using a for loop with an array. So I'm going to declare an array. I'll just call it ages, and let's make it 10 elements equals, and I'm just typing in some ages, Let me see how many that is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's go one more age. Just like that. Okay, so now we have an array of ages. Okay, anytime you work with arrays, often you'll be working with a for loop because you'll need to step through that. So what we're going to do is let's step through and print each element of that array. Okay, so hopefully you remember arrays, the first element index number is 0. Okay, and the last one is index 9. Okay, so we're going to go while I is equal to 0, while you could do less than 10 or less than equal to 9. It's your choice. And then let's increment I++. Okay, and so in this case, let's just print out ages index I. Okay, so the first time through the loop, I is equal to 0, so it's going to print ages index 0, which is 21. The last time through the loop, I will be equal to 9, and it will print ages index 9, which is 5. Okay, so let's run it and see it work. And so there we just printed these ages. Okay, now let's go ahead and how would we calculate, let's calculate the largest number using the same for loop. So to calculate the largest number, I could say, actually, you know what, before I do that, or let's do two things. Let's add up all the ages and see which one is and calculate which is the largest one. Okay, so I'm going to create two new integer variables. One is going to be called sum. That's going to be the sum of all the ages, and I'll initialize it to 0. And then I'll create another variable, largest, and that was going to store the largest variable, and I need to initialize it. I'll do 0, even though a better thing to initialize it to would probably be the first element. Okay, so here, not only am I printing out the age, but I'm going to add that age to sum. Sum is a running total. So sum is equal to the current value of sum plus ages of I. Well, that's not a printout. I was trying to... Okay, and then the largest. How do we calculate the largest one? Well, the same way you would do manually. You'd say, okay, the largest one is 21. Now it's 25, 35. So you just... so you're just keeping, as you're stepping through them, if the one you're looking at is larger than the variable largest, make largest equal to it. So use an if statement. If ages index I is greater than the current value of largest, then make largest variable equal to ages index I, just like that. Okay, so now once the for loop is finished, now we can output sum of ages equals equals sum, and also oldest age is equal to largest. Probably should have named it oldest. Okay, and so let's watch it run. And so it runs, and well, the first thing is I don't like the output there. I'm going to put a \n, oops, right there. I'll clean up the output a little bit. And so now it prints the ages. The sum of all those ages is 360, and then the oldest age is 75. Okay, so that's using a for loop with an array. Okay, now let's look at another example, and that would be stepping through every character of a string. And of course, a string is just an array of characters. So let's my name is name is equal to David. Okay, so I'm going to step through every character of that string using a for loop. Okay, so the first character would be index 0. So for int I is equal to 0, while I is less 2. Okay, so the last character would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But what would be better, instead of hard coding the last one as index 4, since it's a string, we can go while I is less than my name dot size. Okay, so size would return 5, and so I say while I is less than 5, because then it will just go to 4, which 4 is the last character, and then I plus plus. Okay, so in this case, we're just going to see out each character. So I'm going to, of my name, so see out my name, and I can treat it as an array with the square brackets. So that means get character at index I. And let's just put a space, or I'll put an underscore between each character, like that. So you can see it work. So it's going to print out each character, then an underscore. Okay, so here it goes. And there it printed each character and an underscore after it. Okay, now how about let's print the name out backwards. In this case, let's start I at my equals my name dot size minus 1. We're going to print it out backwards. So again, my name dot size is 5, so minus 1 will be 4. So I'll grab the first character. While I is greater than equal to 0, because the first character is 0, and then I minus minus. Okay, so in this case, let's just print out each character of my name backwards. And so print it, and there it is. So there's my name backwards. Okay, so now let's look at some more terminology. Okay, so I'm going to go for int I is equal to 1, while I is less than equal to 10, I plus plus. And there's my braces. Okay, but now I'm going to put a loop inside of this loop. So I'm going to go for int j, I've got to use a different variable. J is equal to 1, while j is less than equal to 10, j plus plus. Okay, so whenever you have a loop within a loop, we'll also often call that loop inside a loop is a nested loop or nested for loop. Okay, so in this case, I'm just going to see out. I'm going to see out an asterisk in a space, and then I'm going to do a new line or an indel right after it does this. So look at the inside for loop first, the inner for loop. It's going to execute 10 times, so it's going to print 10 asterisks. Then it's going to do a new line. And then it's going to do the outside for loop. So this inside for loop, this code right here, is going to execute 10 times. So it's going to print a total of 100 asterisks. Okay, so run it, and so there is 100 asterisks using a nested for loop. Now, one thing that kind of interesting that we could do is make a small change like right here. For the inside for loop, instead of going from 1 to 10, let's go for j is equal to 1 while j is less than equal to I. Now you're going to have to think about that a little bit, because the first time you do the inside for loop, I will be equal to 1. The next time I will be equal to. So look at the pattern that it prints now. Okay, the first time through the inside for loop, I is 1. So it prints 1 asterisk. Then next time is 2. Okay, so, and one thing I forgot to mention before, hopefully you already know this, is if you have a loop that doesn't end, then we call that an infinite loop. Okay, so if I were to see out I, and then a space, then while I is, what if we just say while I is greater than 0? See, this condition will never be false. I starting out at 1, and it's incrementing, it's going up, and we're going to execute as long as I is greater than 0. So this is an infinite loop. And so it's just, here it goes. It's just counting up forever. Okay. I believe that's everything I wanted to cover. When you're programming, you will use for loops and while loops extensively in your code. So have a great day.